Welcome back from your challenge. I hope that went well. Here I want to show you how I would approach this project. And to do that, I'm going to include a few shortcuts and advanced tips in order to add a bit to the conversation. All right, well, here I want to zoom in, so I'll press Command plus a few times to zoom in on the image. Next, I want to create a new layer. To do that, Shift Command N on a Mac, Shift Control N on Windows. I'll name this one Details, and then press Return to create the layer. Next, to select Spot Healing Brush, I'll press J and Shift J until I select the tool. Now with the brush, you can see my brush currently is actually huge, so that's way too big. To make the brush smaller, we have a few options. You can just right-click or control-click on screen, and you can change the brush size like that. Another way that you can change the brush size is to press Control-Option on a Mac. On Windows, press the Alt key and then right-click and then drag left or right. Or use the bracket keys, right or left bracket. Right bracket's bigger, left bracket smaller. And the reason why knowing those different techniques are helpful is because being able to really quickly change your brush size here, so change it almost as you go through each and every little blemish, can really help out. The other thing you want to do is zoom in super close if you want to work on small little details. What I like to do sometimes is put on good music when I do my little detail work, or listen to an audiobook or podcast and get in the zone. Make the brush really small, and I'm just going to go through and clean up the veins that I'm seeing here in the eye, and want to work on those little details as well as the skin. As long as you're doing little stuff, might as well work on all the little stuff, right? So just clicking through here. None of this is rocket science. It's not anything that's super significant as far as the technique that we have here, but perhaps sharing those shortcuts about changing your brush size can help. You notice that what I'm doing as I'm going is I press the spacebar key to reposition, click and drag over an area, and I am also changing my brush size quite a bit using the bracket keys. I have my left hand on the bracket keys right now, so if I get to a blemish that's bigger, I tap the right bracket key, hit that little blemish. Left bracket key makes it smaller, so I can deal with smaller little areas, and so I'm going back and forth like that over all the little details. All right, so don't need to do a ton of this detail work because I think you get the idea on how I go about doing this, but I would really just want to make sure I go all the way around the image. There's some little creases on the arm here. Even though it's out of focus, it's important to clean those up. I want to remove all little things that might draw attention to themselves. So just everything to really smooth this out, make it really clean, seamless as much as possible. All right, that's the detail work. Spot healing brush. Let's move to the next step. Next step is going to be probably creating 3 different adjustment layers, and these layers will be for working on the brightness of the shadows. I'm noticing we have shadows over here and then over here. So I'll create a new layer, Shift Command N. I'm going to abbreviate here and just call this S1. I use abbreviations a lot because it takes too long to type things out, and I'll know S1 refers to shadows. So I'll click OK. Then as long as I have the Spot Healing Brush tool selected, I might try it, just clicking and dragging over that. It didn't work very well, so I'll hit Command Z to undo. And I'll press S to choose the Clone Stamp tool. Clone Stamp tool is currently really low, so if I tap 0, it goes to 100. If I tap 7, it goes to 70. And Option Alt click, and I'm just going to look to try to bring that down a little bit. And all I'm doing here is using Clone Stamp, go to 30%, so I tap 3 on the keyboard to just diminish or minimize the shadow that we have over here. And with this one, we're just seeing, just kind of taking some of the shadow out. Okay, so that's shadow number 1. Let's create another shadow layer. Shift Command N, S2 for this one, and then press Return. I know moving a little bit fast, but hopefully you're seeing, okay, this is how I would tackle it. This is my speed. This is my workflow. For this one, I want to take my Clone Stamp tool to a 10% opacity. So I press 1 on the keyboard. Option Alt click on a good source area and then start to bring out these shadows. I'm using a bigger brush right now, so I'm kind of working on the larger shadow. If I want to get into one of the smaller areas, tap the left bracket key, make that brush smaller, and work on that. And right bracket key, make it a little bit bigger. What can happen with the Clone Stamp technique that we have here is it can create a little bit of softness, so you can lose a little bit of texture. And so with that, what I'm going to do is bring in some healing after I finish this up. I'm also holding on the Option key a lot, or pressing the Option key to set my sample area. So I'm constantly kind of pressing Option, clicking, and then bringing down the shadow. And I'm using this really low opacity. Some people may say, well, Chris, that's too low. That could be the case. I might be going about doing this a little bit too low, but I'm just trying to sort of nudge it out. I'm trying to figure out how can I diminish this. making my brush really small for the shadow above the eye here. And again, with that low opacity, just going to go over that area. Just trying to bring that one down so it's not quite so pronounced. Back and forth. It is hard to talk and retouch at the same time. You have to try it yourself sometime, but it's a little tricky. All right, well, I think you get the idea here. Really just looking at how can we look where we have shadows, bring a little bit of light into them, where we're not going over the top, but we are just taking the edge off of some of the shadows. Changing my brush size as needed. Press the right bracket key there to make that one a little bit bigger. And for some of this, if it softens the skin out and I lose a little bit texture, that's not going to be the worst thing in the world. So just keep going on this. You can see before and after how I'm working on taking those shadows out. I think I'm getting pretty close. And last but not least with this one, I want to create one more layer to bring back some of the texture that we lost. So for that texture layer, I'll create a new layer. Press Shift-Command-N. Call this one S3 because this is going to be another shadow layer. Press J and Shift-J until I get to the healing brush by itself. Now with the healing brush, I want a brush which is bigger. Tap the right bracket key in order to create a bigger brush. Now we have good texture over here in these areas, so I'm going to sample some of that and just bring some of that back in. I'll need to do a little bit of blending with this. What we'll see is that the texture is going to kind of overpower what we have, but I want to have a little bit of texture in the skin because if it's just all smudgy and everything, then it's going to be not quite natural enough. So I'm sampling different areas, kind of rebuilding or re-adding a little bit of texture here, and you can see how that's then mapping some texture into that area. It's too strong, too high, so I'll drop my opacity down, right, and just bring that back. All it's going to do is set a little bit of texture on top of that area. Now, the underlying layer, this here, I could also drop down too, right, if I wanted a little bit less of the effect, or bring it all the way up. I think it actually looks fine all the way up. Now, when it comes to the end of a project like this, I might spend some more time finessing, but I think for demo purposes, it's at a good stopping point. The last thing I would do is organize layers, because when you have all of these layers like this, it can be really kind of a mess to go back and open up a layer document and see all of those. So what I like to do is click in the top, click in the bottom layer, holding on the Shift key. That allows you to select all of those, then press Command-G on a Mac, Control-G on Windows, and then name the whole group. I mean, this really is our retouching group of layers. So we can see the before and after and how we've improved the face, the shadows, some of the little flyaway hairs in a few areas like up in here, and improve the image in that way. And the great thing about this is when we reopen this file, if we realize, hey, the retouching was maybe a little bit too heavy-handed, no big deal. Just open it up, and then we can go in and we can say, well, which layer was it maybe that was a little bit too much? And then we can make any needed adjustments to that. Yet with this one, let me zoom out a little bit so we can see it a touch better. Here is at least how I would try to approach this challenge. If you did it differently, that is completely fine. I mean, that's what makes working on images so fun, is we all have our own approaches. There's so many different ways to do all of these things. Yet for me, here it is, my before and then after.